2013, Edward Snowden revealed to the world that the American government was spying on all of its citizens. None of what we did was, or rather is, private. In every call, every FaceTime, every private message, we feel a third presence, a nameless, faceless entity somewhere far away from us, probably sitting in a cubicle, watching, listening, and noting everything we do. As angered as we were at the government when the news first dropped, we've become accustomed to this notion of living our lives publicly. If our information isn't public to the government, then it's public to corporations. Corporations who harvest our data, analyze what websites we visit, how long we stay on them, what attracts our clicks, what kind of music we listen to, what we buy on Amazon, what businesses we visit, what political views we may share publicly or privately, and so much more. These corporations know more about us than we know about ourselves. In this new age of information, we, the consumers, have become the products, and the marketers and salesmen have become the consumers. This is the world in which we live, and it is in this world, though perhaps a heightened version of it, in which Brandon Cronenberg's Possessor takes place. Possessor is a film that is both straightforward and ambiguous simultaneously. A top-of-the-line corporate assassin, Tasia Voss, uses a sort of VR machine to tap into people's brains, inserting her consciousness into them. When she possesses their bodies, she assassinates her targets, but not before she develops a story for them to make the killing seem believable. I also can't forget to mention that she ends each mission by having the hosts kill themselves, tying her missions off with a neat little bow. Essentially, the company she works for specializes in creating the perfect murders. A corporation wants to cripple their competition by killing its CEO, but they don't want to be implicated. Make it look like someone close to them had a mental break and went postal. No investigation, no questions, not even a cover-up is necessary. And that brings us to the main story of the film. Tasia Voss is hired to murder the CEO of a large data mining company, John Parse. She possesses Parse's son-in-law, Colin Tate, and she attempts to make it seem like Tate cracked under the enormous pressure exerted on him by Parse, the financier of the job, Parse's own son.
Call it an extremely hostile takeover or a very dysfunctional family. I think both descriptors work pretty well, but I'm not here to just recount the story of Possessor to you. So if you want my review, here it is. I highly recommend the movie. Brandon follows in the footsteps of his father David, who made body horror masterpieces like Videodrome, The Fly, and Dead Ringers. David left him big shoes to fill, but Brandon fills them quite nicely with Possessor. In fact, Possessor in many ways feels like a companion piece to Videodrome. Obviously, I can't get too much into it without going into spoiler territory, but just know that these films would work excellently as a double feature. And now time for spoilers. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Kino-related content. But how do I unpack this film? For an ultra-violent thriller, it's got a lot of interesting ideas.
Ideas are amazing.
Let's start with the most obvious, the pervading voyeurism during the internet age. Everyone in the film is a voyeur, and the characters don't really mind the fact that someone they don't know might be watching them. Colin Tate's apartment walls are made of glass. Everything he does in the privacy of his own home is not actually private. Anyone in an adjacent building can see everything he does in his own apartment. And while everyone can see into his life, he can see into everyone else's. Working for his father-in-law's data mining company, he looks through the webcams and phone cameras of potentially millions of unsuspecting users, catching them in their most vulnerable moments in order to gather data for marketing agencies. Through a camera, he spies into these people's lives, which is exactly what Voss does. Before she takes over his body, she studies him, tries to understand who he is, because after she possesses his body, she needs to give a believable performance. But even before she spies on him, the company for which she works developed an entire psychological profile on him and constructed a story in which he kills his father-in-law so that the assassination seems in character for him. But the way they spied on him was superficial. They peered into his external actions, but not into his interior. They don't waste time getting inside his head though. Seeing his life through his eyes, in his mind, that's the ultimate form of voyeurism, isn't it? Wouldn't large corporations just love to get into our heads? Well, maybe they already do. Where is Colin when Voss is controlling his body? Is he in a state of unconsciousness? Is he fully awake? Does he know what he's doing? How does Voss actually control him? It seems at first that this is an Avatar type situation. Her spirit or consciousness is in his body and she's controlling it like it's her own. Considering that he adopts some of her quirks, such as the way that she eats apples, this theory makes sense.
But I don't think that that's the case. Nothing is as simple as that in a Cronenberg film, whether it's David or Brandon. She is possessing him, but he is aware of what he is doing. She is just this extremely influential force inside his mind. He thinks that her thoughts and her actions are his. It's not until after he regains control of his mind that he realizes that he was never in control, that there was a phantom inside him guiding everything he did. So how do we know that we are ourselves? How do we know that we have free will? Does free will even exist? Maybe there's somebody in my mind right now forcing me to make this video. Maybe I don't like movies or filmmaking, but the person who put the microchip into my brain does.
Maybe we are being controlled by large multinational corporations, except they don't have to put hardware in our heads to control us. They've got algorithms and bots that are just as effective. I think, therefore I am. But is it me who is thinking, or is someone doing the thinking for me? So is it they think, therefore they're me? I'm starting to confuse myself.
The concept of free will is controversial, to say the least. And I think the perspective on free will that influences Possessor the most is Friedrich Nietzsche's, as he outlines in his book, Beyond Good and Evil.
Freedom of the will. That is the expression for the complex state of delight of the person exercising volition, who commands and at the same time identifies himself with the executor of the order, who, as such, enjoys also the triumph over obstacles, but thinks within himself that it was really his will itself that overcame them. In this way, the person exercising volition adds the feeling of delight of his successful executive instruments, the useful underwills or undersouls. Indeed, our body is but a social structure composed of many souls, to his feelings of delight as commander. In all willing, it is absolutely a question of commanding and obeying, on the basis, as already said, of a social structure composed of many souls.
It's this master and slave dynamic that plays itself out in the movie. Voss takes control of Tate's body against his will, inflicting her own will, and her own will as determined by the will of her employer onto him. His act of defiance is not just to gain control of his body and his mind, but of her mind as well. He becomes the master, and when he does, he gazes into her memories. The spied on is now the spy. This scene includes the most arresting image in the whole film. Colin Tate wearing Voss's face as a mask. To become the master of his own mind, he has to assume her identity, tricking the computer chip in his brain and pushing her consciousness somewhere else, to some kind of cyber limbo. But even still, the battle for control of Colin Tate continues, though now with an inverted power dynamic. The ultimate exertion of the power of the possessor over the host body is the act of self-deletion. But Voss can't accomplish it at the beginning of the movie, and she can't go through with it at the end. The hosts fight back too much, consciously or just out of their innate will to survive, which leads to Voss's son killing Tate. But it's not Voss's son. It's Girder. Knowing how long it takes for the company to implant a microchip, I think it's safe to say that Voss's son has been possessed before. Going back to the idea of voyeurism, was Girder looking through the eyes of Voss's son when she wasn't on the clock? Was she using her son to control Voss's private life? Girder complained at the beginning of the film that Voss's family was holding her back, that her family could be her demise. Perhaps it was in the company's grand plan to have Colin Tate murder Voss's family, or perhaps it was merely a happy little accident. I don't think it matters if the company planned for the deaths of Voss's family. Their goal for her is clear: complete dehumanization. She will be a top asset for them when she is a blank slate with no connections to the outside world. Slowly but surely, they are transforming her from a human into a ghost, a physical mind virus. That's why I think this film is a good companion piece to Videodrome. Both films deal with technology changing our states of reality and our flesh, though it is done differently in each film. Tasia Voss slowly vanishes from her own body. Each assignment strips her of part of her humanity, a memory, a feeling, a thought. We see this quite clearly with the butterfly. In the beginning, she remembers feeling bad for killing it, but at the end, that feeling of regret, of shame, no longer exists. And it got me thinking, that third object at the beginning, was it an object of hers that she merely forgot about? It very well could be. She can't even function as a normal human. She has to rehearse her conversation she has with her husband. She can only think about death while making love, although that might just mean that she has a lot in common with Art Hose. She can't even remember that she and her husband are separated. She's completely detached from her family, from any reality outside of her work. Really, she's more of a human when she's inhabiting somebody else's skin. But when she is controlling one of her prey, she sees the world as a simulation. That's why she spots artifacting in her world. She can't be human unless she is mimicking somebody else in a virtual space. And that leads me to the reason for her preference for extreme violence. She's given a gun to assassinate her targets, but she prefers more brutal methods. Why is this? Does this reality not feel real enough for her? Does she have to make it extra bloody to make it feel real, and to make herself know that she's not in a simulation? When we are dealing in the cyber world, I think that we're definitely less affected by violence. How many people commit atrocities while playing Grand Theft Auto and think nothing of it? In a video game, you might just be killing lines of code and not real people. But I think that if we were to operate in a simulated space, even if that simulated space turned out to actually be real, more people would be okay with committing heinous acts of violence. Nevertheless, her murders haunt her external life, and the process of possessing another individual drowns out those PTSD-induced thoughts and visions.
It's kind of like acting, isn't it? Actors love to give big performances, and some of the best actors feel more at home in their own skin when they're playing a character. Voss herself is a good actress, and thus, she's a great assassin.
And for a moment, I just want to say this. Christopher Abbott is great in this film. He's playing a character possessed by another person, so he had to act as a person struggling between two separate identities, and he pulls it off in a grounded and subtle fashion. But getting back to it, you could also definitely look at this movie as a film dealing with imposter syndrome, the condition in which a person doubts their own successes and merits, and fears that people will see them as a fraud. It's the feeling that many successful people get, that they aren't really themselves, that they can't attach their real success to them, that it must have been someone else, that they're just along for the ride in their own bodies. The director, Brandon Cronenberg, stated that this was the feeling that led him to writing the script.
I was waking up in the morning and feeling like I was sitting up into someone else's life and having to scramble to construct some kind of character who could operate in that context. And so I ended up wanting to write a film about someone who may or may not be an imposter in their own life.
I think that there's way more that you could take away from this movie. Truly, I can only really scratch the surface with my YouTube videos, so I would love to hear what you all think in the comments down below. This was one of the more interesting films to release this year, and I think that it balanced a good, entertaining story with very thought-provoking themes and ideas. I'm the Kino Corner, and I will see you all in the next video. Pull me out.
Can you tell me about this?
This is a pretty cool movie that, obviously very popular. David Cronenberg. How can you not like it? This one, Letter Never Sent. Well, probably because the postal service can't be counted on. What a waste of our tax dollars. Brilliant commentary on the state of the government. And this one, Lady Snowblood. Obviously, when you put the blood in snow, you get a very nice snow clone of delight and also tragedy, which is a very big juxtaposition of themes that is obviously clearly important to the narrative.